What is up, everyone? Welcome to Over Your Shoulder. Just like the name, that's what we'll be doing. Today, we're going to be looking over Michelle Sabolchick Pettinato's shoulder and diving into her front of house rig for the last tour she was on. Michelle currently tours with Elvis Costello and has either mixed or toured with Janet Jackson, Mr. Big, Styx, Adam Lambert, Goo Goo Dolls, Melissa Etheridge, Kesha, Gwen Stefani, Christina Aguilera, Jewel, Indigo Girls, Fuel, Fastball, Joan Osborne, Spin Doctors, and many other top-tier artists. Outside of keeping very busy with touring, she's also the founder of Mixing Music Live and is also the co-founder for soundgirls.org. And she was also inducted into the Full Sail Hall of Fame in 2015. So let's see what she's got going on, shall we? Hey, Michelle, thank you for joining me on this little YouTube thing of mine.
Hey, Drew, thanks for having me.
I just wanted to bring you on and so you could share your knowledge with all of us. And I figured we could just peek over your shoulder today, if that was okay.
Cool. I'm happy to be here.
Let's start with how you got your start in the industry. Out of curiosity, how young were you when you started?
When I officially started working in live sound, I was about 21, I think, early 20s.
How did you get started? Did you get started in like a production company, or did you start in a studio, or did you just freelance tour? Or?
Well, I actually went to two different technical schools. Like I decided in high school that I wanted to be a sound engineer, and I, didn't know anyone in the music business, didn't know anything about it. I just knew, okay, I got to make records. I want to do this. And I found a school in Ohio that had a basic recording engineering program. It was the recording workshop. And after that, I started working at a little tiny radio station. It was basically selling advertising. Because
okay.
I wanted to make commercials, and they're like, oh, that's cool, but you got to sell them first. So I started doing radio advertising, and then went to Nashville to try and get a job at a studio. I spent about 3 weeks. I was staying with a cousin who lived there. Literally spent 3 weeks walking around Music Row for every day with my little tiny resume that said the recording workshop and WMGH, thinking that, I had a clue, and very quickly realizing I didn't know shit and had no idea even how to get my foot in the door. Then I heard about Full Sail in Florida. So I enrolled in Full Sail, and that was 1989. While I was in Full Sail, that's when I got into live sound. I had originally wanted to be a studio engineer. Even though I went to tons of concerts, it never occurred to me that you could actually do that for a living. So when I had my live sound course, all of a sudden it was like, ding, 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 this is for me. I get to mix music and travel the world, and someone's going to pay me for all that. So that's what, gave me the bug for live sound. As soon as I graduated, I basically did an internship at a little tiny local sound company. Was there for about, I guess, around 6 months, where I'd work in the shop Monday through Friday, and then Thursday nights and through Sunday, I would go out, and just work shows with the other guys or my own shows, just doing all the little local bands in the area. After that, I moved back to Florida, and I worked at a couple nightclubs. I was running sound and lights at it was like a 50s and 60s band. I think it was called Little Darlings. And it was all these bands from the 50s and 60s, like the Platters, the Drifters, all that kind of stuff. I was also working at this big entertainment complex where I worked in the AV department, and I mixed in two of their clubs and working as a stage. And I was just basically taking every job I could get that had anything to do with audio and concerts. Worked at another sound company, was mixing local bands. And I did all that for a few years. And then my first official tour was in 1992 with the Spin Doctors. And that came about from one of my classmates that I met at Full Sail that I became friends with. He knew how badly I wanted to go on tour. And he ended up, the band was just kind of starting to get a little bit of a buzz. So he was mixing them, and he didn't want to be on the road anymore. So he called me up and offered me the gig. He's like, I'm looking for a replacement. You want to try this? I'm like, yes. So I went out and I met them, and it worked out. And that was the start of my touring career. And I've never looked back.
I mean, the Spin Doctors in 92.
The timing was perfect, because I came on board in like early summer, and a month later, their album hit like Billboard Top 100 and just kept rising from there. So it was a great time. We were all on our way up together, and it was, just such a great group of people. Like we were a family, and everybody was riding that wave, and it was pretty incredible.
So you went from like small clubs to like arenas, and how big did it get?
First show I did, my friend was still there. So he was on, it was kind of like a 2-week trial period, like, we're going to be in your area. Come meet everybody, jump on the bus. 2 weeks later, we'll be back in your area. So you have 2 weeks. If they like you, great. You stay. If they don't like you, you can get off the bus when we get back to your town. So he mixed the first show to just give me an overview of this is, how they sound. This is blah, blah, blah. And I mixed the next show, and they were, just club gigs. So I mixed one show, and the next day we were on the Horde tour, which was this big hippie jam band festival tour in the 90s. Blues Traveler, Bella Fleck. I think even Fish might have been on it at one point. Yeah, like one show. And then the next day it's like, okay, you're the third band on the main stage, and it's a festival gig. And this is long before digital. Front of house, I think, was a Soundcraft 8000B that everybody was sharing. I think there was two of them. So while one band was on, you could be setting up your band on the other one. We literally had 20 minutes to roll our stuff on stage, get it mic'd and wired, do a line check over the headphones, and then go. No sound checks at all, So it was literally like a trial by fire, It was like, bam, you're right into the frying pan. But it was great because it really helped me to hone my mixing skills. Like I had to learn how to pull a mix together really fast because our set was only like 30 minutes or so. So you couldn't take half the set to build your drum mix. You had to pull it together within the first song. And that was great for me. The pressure was on, and you had to survive. You had to do it. So it really gave me some good mixing chops pretty early on.
So then in the early part of the Spin Doctors touring, you weren't carrying audio. You were kind of just on whatever console they had locally.
The whole first year, everything was gear du jour. Like, after the Horde tour, we were back doing like large clubs and some college gigs. There were sound companies throughout the country that, we tried and get the same company to provide the gear for that region. We had a couple different companies that we worked with a lot. So I'd always had the same gear, but a lot of the clubs, they had in-house stuff, and you'd go in and it was like, I'd spend the first hour just making their system work. I mean, like PAs have come a long way. Back then you'd have a stack of components on one side and a stack of completely different components on the other side. It was like the left and right didn't even match. So, I mean, it wasn't even like left and right sound difference. Like, yeah, they're not even the same PA. So
that's crazy.
You'd go into these clubs and amps were wired wrong, stuff was out of phase, speakers were blown. And it was just a matter of spending the first hour trying to get things working properly and sounding okay, because they weren't ever going to sound great. Wanted to make them sound as best they could. And a lot of the club, the in-house guys, they just didn't care. They're old road guys that just wanted a local job where they can drink beer and get paid and not have to care about anything. I'd be like, hey man, there's a blown speaker over here. This amp is wired out of phase. And so like, okay, I guess I'll do it. And so there was a lot of that, like, just basically rebuilding club PA systems to make them, work right. And using whatever they had in house. Yeah.
So I'm guessing you learned a lot on the first couple tours.
It was, yeah. I mean, it was as grueling as it was. It was a great experience because it helped me really hone my troubleshooting skills, really train my ears. This was like long before the days of smart and any of that kind of stuff. Some guys would take, an RTA and an analyzer mic and analyze the PA and do the tuning like that. But, we couldn't afford that stuff. And these clubs didn't have that. So I basically had to use my ears to tune the PA. And it was a lot of really, paying your dues.
It's amazing. I mean, that's what makes you have a solid foundation for moving forward. Like I feel like I can sympathize with some of it, but not all of it. It's a different world. I mean, you still go into clubs where things don't work and things are out of phase and speakers are wrong, but not quite the opposite components or different components on one side versus another. That's a pretty extreme situation. Yeah. Okay. So coming up, did you have a mix engineer that was an inspiration for the way you do your mix?
I don't know if I had an inspiration. I mean, I was a huge fan of ML ProSize. When I was in high school and I, decided I wanted to be a recording engineer, I met a local promoter that let me kind of follow him around to shows to see what goes on. And he gave me some great advice. He said, if you think you want to do this, get Mix Magazine and read it from, cover to cover every month. Because if you don't like reading about it, you're not going to like doing it. Oh, so I did. And this is when I don't know if they still do, but they had a whole like live sound section every month. And I think ML might have been a contributor, or they just wrote about him a lot because he was one of the biggest engineers at the time.
Yeah.
And so I kind of like, oh, this guy, like I idolized him. I'm like, he's mixing all these great bands. And, so here's a funny story about Spin Doctors and ML. So one of my first year, I think it was like the second year I was working for them, we were playing Deep Ellum in Texas, and I'm mixing, it was an evening with kind of show. So I'm mixing, like we do an hour, they take a 20-minute break, and then they come back and do another 40 minutes or so. So as I'm mixing the show, I see this guy walk in, and he kind of stands next to the console, arms crossed. He looks like this big biker dude. And I'm like, who's this guy? Why is he standing here? Yeah. And I'm mixing, and then I see him, after the set, he's talking to the lighting guy who's set up behind me. And then they're chatting for about, 5-10 minutes. And then he goes away. And then the guy says to me, he's like, so do you know who that was? And I said, no. He's like, that's ML Procise. I'm like, are you kidding me? He's like, yeah, he's coming back for the, after the intermission. I'm like, oh, you shouldn't have told me that, because now I'm going to be a nervous wreck. Like, this guy's standing here in front of house, and I idolize him. He was so sweet. Like, after the show, he came up, he shook my hand, he introduced himself, he gave me his card. He's like, you ever need anything, you call me, you did a great job. And we were friends ever since. Like, he was very supportive through my whole career, and he was just such a wonderful guy. And about a year after that, he was out with ZZ Top, and they were coming through my area. So he invited me out to the show, and I sat behind him at front of house, and I was blown away. I mean, it was just like you were just listening to the world's biggest stereo, because it was so perfect. Everything just sounded like a giant record. It was just incredible to listen to him mix. And I think he mixed Guns N' Roses back in the 80s, and I had seen a couple shows of that bands. I didn't know him he was mixing them at the time, but just incredible engineer and incredible person.
That's awesome. So, I mean, you kind of beat me to the punch on the next question, because I was going to ask you, one of the things that I like to ask on this thing, because, listening is so subjective, it's fun to hear who you think the best mix that you didn't do was. Like, what was the best show that you heard? So I'm assuming it was that show by ML.
Yeah, I mean, that was pretty incredible. I mean, and I've been, there's a lot of guys out there who are great engineers, and I love listening to the mix. Yeah. But that one, that just has stuck with me through my entire career, how good it sounded, and I was mixing Styx a few years ago. We were on tour with Def Leppard, and Ronan McHugh, who mixes Def Leppard, does an incredible job every night. So I always loved, listening to his show after we were done. And there's a lot of great engineers out there that it's a pleasure to listen to.
That's awesome. I'm going to slant it towards a different direction. And I had this question because I felt when I was coming up, I felt like it was a very difficult situation to deal with the crusty house front house. And I can't imagine how challenging it had to have been to be a female coming up in that time and in such a male-dominated field. So I had to ask the question, like, how did you put up with what we have to put up with all the time? I can't imagine it being a very easy situation.
I think it was more so I was so driven, like, this is what I'm going to do. Yeah. And I took my job very seriously, and I tried really hard to be very good at it. The crews that I worked with, my fellow crewmates on tour and the bands always gave me respect. I never had to deal with anybody who was just like, what are you doing here? It was the most of the grief came from like local stagehands. Yeah. And it was funny when I was working at the little local sound company, the bouncers used to give me a hard time because we'd go in, set up, do sound check and leave, go get dinner and come back later to do the show. And they would always try and charge me a cover thinking I was the girlfriend of somebody in the band. I'm like, dude, I'm the sound engineer. There was a lot of, when I was on tour, you'd meet with a lot of like, you're the front of house, like a lot of surprise. And I don't know if I've just blocked it out or I just ignored it, that I don't remember anyone ever really giving me a hard time about it. It was mostly surprise. But there was an instance, when I was mixing Spin Doctors, I think it was 94, they got asked to be the support act for the Rolling Stones Voodoo Lounge tour. Okay. And it was, stadiums all over North America. We were doing North America, Canada, and South America with them. I think we were out there for a couple months. There was a point where I was gone. I was working for somebody else. They had taken a break and I went and did something else. And then they hired another engineer in the meantime. And he was, I think it was Craig Schertz. He was an old Claire guy. And he was, somebody who'd been around forever. Everybody knew him. So then he left and I came back right before the Stones tour. And we get out there and it was back when Shoko was doing the Rolling Stones and it was a bunch of Shoko guys. And I remember the first day I'm walking out to front of house in the middle of the, the field, and I'm climbing up on the, the scaffolding to get on the riser. And there's, the front of house engineer and the system tech. And, I'm like 23, 24 years old, I think at that time. And I looked like I was about 12 because I always looked a lot younger than I was. So I got a baseball cap on, my hair in a ponytail, and I'm just this little girl climbing up on the riser, and they're looking at me like, who the heck are you? And I said, yeah, I'm the front of house engineer for Spin Doctors. And they're like, where's Craig? Like just right up, because they knew him and they were expecting their buddy to be there. And they're like, who's this freaking little girl coming out here? And it was just, okay, put on your big girl pants today, because it was just the attitude, like, who the heck do you think you are? What are you going to do? It took about a couple days till they realized, like, I knew what I was doing. I wasn't just some idiot. I knew how to mix. And I was actually, for only being on tour for about 2 years and mixing in a stadium and not, destroying it, it was not too bad. So I kind of just put my head down and did my gig every day and, stayed out of their way and, just kind of won them over. They warmed up to me and realized, like, okay, you actually have your shit together. But it was, the first day, it was pretty intimidating. It's like, they're older, road guys have been on the road forever, that whole, Texas kind of attitude. And it was a lot to deal with. So that was probably one of the most intense things I had to deal with, but I survived. And that's just basically it. It was always put my head down, get to work, and block out the noise. It's like, I'm here to do my job. You're not going to stop me. You're not going to get in my way, and I'm going to do it. And by the end of the night, usually those guys who are doubting you and wondering how you got your gig, like, how'd you get your gig? We're just like, hey, can I write down what you were doing on the drums? Can I write down your EQ settings? And can I copy? And like,
I love that.
Sure,
That's amazing. That has to feel like a little win in a situation where it had to have been kind of a little deflating to come into a show that exciting, like something so big, and like being met with that kind of resistance. Right. I'm just curious if you have any advice you'd want to share with any up and coming female front of house engineers.
Sure. I mean, I hate when people say, oh, it's going to be harder for you because you're a woman, because I feel like you always find what you're looking for. When I started, it never even occurred to me that there weren't other women that did this. And this was like the 80s. And, the only other woman I knew of was Carrie Keyes, who, mixed Pearl Jam and the Chili Peppers. And it took years before I even met, another woman sound engineer. Like, I just didn't think about it. It didn't bother me. It's like, this is what I love. This is what I want to do. And now, like these days where there's more women, than there were for years, I feel like they're kind of putting these obstacles in front of them. Like, oh, it's going to be hard for me because I'm a girl. And as soon as you do that, you're looking for that conflict everywhere. Still to this day, I walk into a venue and everyone assumes I'm the wardrobe girl or the production assistant. They never assume I'm front of house. I don't care. I don't get my panties in a wad because of that. I'm just like, no, I'm the front of house engineer. And they're like, oh, cool. No one's ever said, oh, well, you're not going to be the front of house in my, venue, lady. It's, it's always been, you're met with surprise, but they usually are like, oh, that's cool. And I know some women who get really bent out of shape when they get that reaction, like, and you can't do your job when you're stewing on that kind of stuff all day long. You can't focus and do your job because it's always in your head and you're just kind of, self-winding. And, and I've been there. Like when I first started out, like I was my own worst critic, and I always took everything like, what am I doing wrong? What am I doing wrong? And it gets really hard to focus on the actual job and mixing. When you put all that energy into just looking for conflict and granted, like there are times, like no one should ever have to deal with sexism or harassment or anything that's uncomfortable. But just by, somebody saying something that they maybe didn't mean the way it came out because it was awkward comment or whatever, just let it go. You have to block the noise out and just focus on doing the best you can. And when you are professional and you do your job and you know what you're doing, people notice, and the right people notice. And the people who give you crap about it, you don't want to work with them anyway. So just, keep your head down and do the best you can. I mean, that's great advice. And I mean, that's true for, I think, everyone. If you're looking for a bad show or looking for a bad time, you're going to find it. Right. Yeah. You always find what you're looking for. Yeah, exactly. Well, let's jump into your setup for Elvis Costello. That was the last tour before the lovely Thou Shall Not Be Named. Yeah. So let's dive in. What console were you on for this? So I've been on the Midas Pro X.
Okay. Is there a particular reason you chose that desk?
I went into digital kicking and screaming. I think anybody who knows me knows I'm an old analog lover, and I fought the digital world for as long as I could. But having done a lot of one-offs on the variety of digital consoles out there, the first time I did a show with the Midas, it was actually like I could hear the difference in quality, how much better it sounded than everything else.
Yeah.
And to me, it's all about the quality. Like, use the right tool for the job. I shouldn't have to buy $5,000 worth of plugins to make my desk sound good. So I won't use certain desks because of that, because, I just want the right tool. I want something that's going to sound good right from the start. And I love the way the Midas sounds. It's still not as good as analog, but it's better. And the Midas, like I carried an XL4, in the H3000 for years before going to digital, and the Pro X, the Pro series really responds like an XL4. Like I find I can drive it hard like an XL4. I can get that kind of harmonic distortion or whatever they built into the digital to create that. It just responds like that. And that's the way I like to mix. So it feels also the most familiar to me to mix on. Being
that you were being dragged kicking and screaming into the digital world, it was very surprising to see the picture of your front of house rack. There's not a whole lot in there, and I love that, because I feel like you build the show into the console, which I feel like is I have my own reasons for doing that, but I would love to know your reason, because there has to be a reason why you don't have a ton of outboard gear.
Well, yeah, it kind of came out of necessity. Like even when I was analog, like I'm always been a less is more, keep it simple, because it comes back to troubleshooting. It's, when you're in the middle of a show and stuff's going down, you've got to figure out what the problem is really fast. If you've got a bunch of things in your signal chain, like, well, which piece of gear is it that died, or where's the breakdown? So it's about that. And when I started using digital, I still carried like an outboard rack full of distressors for compression, because I love the distressor and effects and different things. And what happened was, especially on fly dates, you'd get there and you advance, like, look, I've got this rack. We need to interface it to your console. They'd never have the right cables or be like a 5D and it didn't have the insert slot. And it was just, it became such a problem that I'm like, all right, I want to be able to mix my show on whatever I get and have consistent quality. I don't want to have a crappy show today because I don't have my plugins. They're not working. My waves rack is down. I want to be able to have a consistent sounding show no matter where I go. And because a lot of the other stuff I do as well, some of the artists I've been working for in the past, doing in one country, you're in an arena tour, then you're doing fly dates around South America, then you're, in the Philippines on, so it's trying to find your exact setup everywhere you go in the world is next to impossible. And a lot of them just don't have the budget to just get whatever you want. You've got, free reign here. There's, they're dealing with truck space and with budgets all the time. It's just, let me make sure I can do what I do with whatever I've got. So that's why I've kept it pretty much just the desk, and a few little pieces.
I love that. Well, let's jump into the rack and see what we got going on here. It looks like at the top of your rack, you have the Waves Max Bcl. Let us know what you're using this on, why you chose it.
Yeah. So the Waves is I love that unit. I basically use it on my master stereo bus as very light limiting. Okay. And when I say limiting, it's not like you're when you think of a limiter, it's just squashing the signal. But the Waves Max has a compressor limiter and also the like a subharmonic synthesizer in it. What I do is I'll just set up the limiting so that it's just catching, anything that might be popping out, not really squashing or limiting the signal. But the best thing about it is the way it works is, if you put a limiter on your mix, as soon as like something like your kick drum or your snare drum jumps out, it's going to squash the entire mix. Well, this will, the snare drum is kind of hitting the limiter. It'll stop the snare signal, but it'll let everything else come up. So it's not just clamping down on the entire mix. It's just clamping down on that little thing that's popping out. So it just kind of, as it's coming up, it's just kind of sounding bigger as opposed to squashed. Okay. So it just works. It's really transparent and it does a fantastic job. And again, like I said, it's just literally so I'm not driving some portion of the system into compression by some little thing. And the other great thing about it is the subharmonic on it. Which has saved me in a lot of using local production, local stacks and racks. I always have it because you'll get into a situation where the venue just there's no room for subs, like a theater that they have like one sub on stage on each side because that's all they can fit because of seating and fire lanes. And I'm like, well, that's not really going to be even half enough for what I need. So you just pop in the subharmonic and you can dial up the frequency that you want, and it will create this extra sub, but it doesn't actually tax the amplifiers. So you're getting this extra sub that you need. And you're not like, oh, you're not killing the PA because you're trying to get that, that 60 out of the, the main hang. So
it has a crossover then. Is that what for the max
bass? It has
bass?
a selectable frequency. So and you can, I don't know how high it goes, but I'll usually, depending on what I'm looking for and what I'm mixing, usually around, but anywhere between 50 and 80. Like sometimes if I want that just nice round lows, I'll go lower. If I want that kick drum that's punching you in the chest, I'll go a little bit closer to 80.
Okay.
But yeah, it depends on what I'm mixing.
Okay. So then question with the limiter, how fast are you kind of gauging that off the snare drum? Is that kind of your reference for setting up the attack on this unit, or it depends on the act?
Yeah, it kind of depends on the show.
Okay.
And I'm really just setting it so that like what I'll do is I'll get my mix going without it in to where I'm happy. And then I'll just pop it in and kind of just dial it down just so slowly till it's just tickling the limit, and leave it there. Yeah.
Is it like a faster attack? Are you trying to?
It's not real fast, but it's definitely closer to fast than medium. Yeah.
Okay, and release time kind of like a slow musical release. I'm assuming. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Let's jump down to what looks like. I think is it an M2000?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what are you using this guy for?
That is my lead vocal reverb. That's the only thing about the Midas is like I'm not crazy about the reverbs in there, so I usually have either an M2000 or M5000 in my rack for lead vocals.
Are you looking for? Is there like a specific preset that you're using in here, like a plate or a hall? Or
there's a couple. I think it's the Great Vocal Hall. There's actually a few different halls that I like. There's a vintage hall. There's the Great Vocal Hall, which is what I use on Elvis. There's a dark chamber I like as well. But then I use it in dual engine mode, so you can have two different presets going at the same time. So I'll have that, and there's a plate, like I think a short vocal plate that I use as well. And then in the other engine, I generally use it's called Next Door, and it's just kind of a very dry sound, like if you're listening to somebody next door. But when you blend that in with the reverb, it just kind of gives it a little bit of body, so it's not just the washy reverb, you're still kind of getting a little bit of body with it.
Just for everyone listening, so there's two engines in this unit. You're running them in tandem, like one feeds with another? Is that how you're?
They're like, it's two separate. So you can actually, the way the unit works is you can have it that you can feed them that they both work together, like one does feed the other, or you can run them individually. And what I'll do is I run them individually, so it's almost like two inputs, because then I can pop one in and out, because some of the songs I won't want that next door, I want the real washy reverb. And then some, like with the short plate, like I really like the way that sounds when you combine them together, so I'll pop them both in. But it just gives you a lot of flexibility, because you can also have one reverb set up for this song, and then have your next one for the next song ready to go, and you just bypass the one and turn the other one on, and there you go. It's handy,
Nice. The TC Electronics have been a kind of a fave on this show from a lot of engineers I've talked to. A lot of them like the algorithms. Now, sometimes I tend to skip the CD player, but this time I think we should talk about it, because I feel like this is probably a valuable tool in your front of house rack. What are you using the CD player for?
So I like to use for tuning the PA. So what my process is, I'll let the system tech do their thing, whether they use Smart or whatever, just kind of get everything time aligned and then hand it to me, and I'll do the EQ to my preference. I'm really old school with it. I have a playlist of songs that I use to tune the PA with. I know a lot of guys, they'll use their vocal and the lead vocal mic, but my voice sounds like that big in the PA, and I can't get it to feedback or do anything. So the songs have always worked for me, and I have a specific songs that I'm looking for different things. That's what I've always used. And I prefer to have them on CD rather than, the iPod or phone. Are
you feeding the left right then? You're just sending it through the left right. I'm assuming you have matrices for your speaker outs.
Yeah. So I send the master stereo bus to matrices, and the way I break it down is it'll be like main left and right, sub front fill. And if there's side hangs or delays, whatever else. What I do with the CD player is I just plug it into 2 channels, leave it flat, no EQ, no compression or anything, and just send it straight to the stereo bus.
Okay. And you said you're old school, and I had heard on another interview that you were saying, well, I don't tend to rely on smart. So what is there a process that you go through tuning? Do you like mute certain parts of the PA to move forward, or do you focus on something first? And how do you kind of go about tuning the PA just by ear?
Yeah. So what I do is I have a song, it's instrumental, but it's got, like a good full range of everything going on. So I'll put that on and have everything on and just kind of walk the venue to get a feel for what the PA is doing in the room. It's like an acclimation period. Like, okay, this is what it sounds like in here. Yeah. And then I'll mute everything but the main left and right. And then I will, EQ that. When I'm happy with that, I'll add the subs in. Then I'll add the front fill. A lot of times too, I'll listen to the front fill by themselves. And I usually do like a pretty high pass filter on them just to, because I don't want all that low coming through it. I want just the clarity for the front. And then if there's side hangs, I'll listen to those individually. There's always that wash of the frequencies that cross over between the mains and the sides, and it can get really heavy in the mids. Side hangs, I EQ them more to just fill in what's missing, as opposed to like if you're just listening to those by themselves, because you'll get, you get a lot from the subs and you'll get a lot from the mains. So you just don't need to have like 2 or 3 different PAs going at the same time. Once I get those sounding the way I want, I'll bring in the mains with them and listen to that and, get rid of anything that's, getting too heavy from building up. Yeah. Then just listen to all of it together, depending on, the amount of time. Cause that's the other thing too. Arena tours, you're always up against the clock, cause it's like, well, you got to load in video and lighting and wait for that to get in the air. And then if you're lucky, you can get audio in the air before too, but most of the time we're waiting on everybody else before we can get the PA flown. And then it's like, oh, sound checks at, an hour. So I've got 10 minutes to tune an arena and, do a line check. You're up against time. So sometimes it's a very abbreviated version of that. Yeah. When it's possible, that's the way I like to do it. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Being it's on CD, we have to know what the tune songs are, because that you got it literally printed on a CD. So what's your tune songs?
The first one I start with is, it's a song called Liberation Front, and it's by Thievery Corporation. Okay. And it's funny because as soon as I put this song on, everyone's coming, what is that song? What's that song? Everybody loves it. But it's just a fantastic song. That's what I kind of walk around and acclimate with. And it'll vary a little bit depending on the style of music that I'm doing. But usually Seal, I think it's Kiss from a Rose. It's from one of the early Seal albums when he did the Batman soundtrack, which is like way back. No, it's called Bring It On. Seal, Bring It On. And that helps me get the low mids and the lows tightened up because there's a lot of boominess in that. Then there's a Thomas Dolby. I go back and forth between Pulp Fiction and Hot Sauce because that has kind of like a real nasally upper mid range and some good mids in that. Okay. I use Hella Good by No Doubt for the subs in the top. Robert Plant, heaven knows, has got, really nice high end in that. So those, I feel like I'm missing one, but that's, the gist of it. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that concludes part 1 with Michelle. Please tune in next week for the conclusion of episode 4. I want to thank Michelle for coming on and sharing her time and her knowledge with all of us. If you dug this video, please like, please share, and please subscribe. Until next time, take care and be safe.